Good evening, dear insomniac. Or good evening again, if you're one of the ones who keeps finding the way back. Either way, I'm glad the door was where you left it. Come in and shake off whatever the night's decided to do out there. It's raining tonight, the soft, patient sort, not the kind that's trying to get anywhere. Just the kind that taps along the roof and runs down the dark windows and keeps the meadow company until morning. I've been standing here at the window a while, watching it come down. No task in it, nothing to tend. I simply like to, some nights. Take whichever chair suits you. Nearest the fire, if the walk left you cold, or the one here by the window, if you'd like to watch the rain with me a moment first before you settle. There's no wrong way to be here. There never is. I've a story for you tonight, and it's one of my own. One I wrote down a long while ago and slipped back onto the shelf between visits, so I always know where to reach for it when someone comes in needing it. I rather think you might tonight. It's a small story about a boy who couldn't do a thing that everyone around him could do with their eyes shut, and about what he learned in that long, quiet stretch of not being able to do it. I call it The Boy Who Began Again. So let the rain carry on without you. Let your shoulders come down from wherever they've been all day. This one starts high up in a tower, on a morning a good deal colder than this one. High atop the silver hills stood the Everlight Tower, where ivy climbed the ancient stone in slow green rivers, and enchanted lanterns drifted through the halls each evening, like gentle stars that had wandered indoors to get out of the weather. It was home to wizards of every age, grey-bearded ones who had forgotten more magic than most people ever learn, and middling ones still finding their feet, and small ones only just beginning. But none of them was younger than Rowan, and none of them, not one, was more determined. Rowan was an apprentice with bright, watchful eyes and an even brighter dream, that one day, if he worked at it hard enough, he might become a truly great wizard. He carried that dream around with him, the way some children carry a favourite stone in a pocket, turning it over and over, taking it out to look at when no one was watching. And in the beginning, everything about that tower filled him with wonder. He learned the names of magical herbs that glowed pale silver beneath the moon, and closed up shy and tight by day. He read stories, thick, dusty, marvellous stories of dragons who curled around crystal lakes and guarded them for 1,000 years without ever once growing bored. He brewed bubbling potions in dented copper pots that shifted through every colour he had a name for, and a few he didn't, and filled the whole classroom with the smell of rain and cloves. He loved all of it. He truly did. But there was one spell that would not listen to him, the levitation spell. It was one of the very first useful spells that every apprentice learned. Nothing grand, nothing showy, just genuinely, quietly useful. With a calm mind and a steady hand, it could lift almost anything gently up into the air and set it down again wherever you liked. The other apprentices took to it the way ducklings take to water. They floated heavy books up onto high shelves without so much as standing. They carried water buckets across the courtyard with a lazy flick of the wrist, not spilling a drop. They sent feathers looping and dancing about the classroom in long ribbons, laughing, showing off a little, the way you do when a thing comes easily. Rowan couldn't lift a pebble. Not a rock, not a stone. A pebble. The smallest, lightest, most agreeable little pebble he could find in the whole practice courtyard, chosen specially because surely, even he could manage that. Every morning, before the sun had properly cleared the hills, he was out there, wand raised, feet planted, breath held. Levitas. The pebble would quiver, the briefest shiver, there and gone, so slight he was never sure he hadn't imagined it. And then sit exactly where it had sat before, looking, he thought, rather smug about the whole business. Again. Levitas. Nothing at all. Day after day, he practiced until his arm ached from the shoulder down, and his voice went thin and scratchy from saying the same word to the same stubborn stone. He tried standing tall, and he tried crouching low. He tried holding the wand loose and holding it tight. He tried every last scrap of advice that anyone was kind enough to give him. Picture it lighter, Rowan. Picture it wanting to rise. Don't force it, invite it. And none of it, not one word of it, made the pebbles so much as wobble. Sometimes he'd be certain he'd done it. He'd see the stone shift and his heart would leap up into his throat. And then he'd feel the wind on the back of his neck and understand that it had only been the wind all along, moving the stone the way wind moves small things, with no help from him whatsoever. Each failure landed a little heavier than the one before it. They stacked up in him quietly, the way small stones stack into a large and awkward weight if you carry enough of them far enough. Before long, Rowan dreaded the practice courtyard more than anything else in the world. When the lesson began each morning, he would already be able to hear it. That soft, dry scrape of everyone else's stones, lifting cleanly off the ground, all around him, a whole chorus of easy little liftings, and in the middle of it, silent, his own pebble, sitting there, going nowhere. Then, one wet evening, after a lesson that had gone no better than any of the others, Rowan set his wand down on the windowsill of the quiet upper room, and stood and looked out across the misty forest far below the tower. "I've tried everything," he whispered, to the glass, mostly, or to the rain, or to no one. "Everything there is. Maybe I don't have enough magic. Maybe some people don't." He hadn't heard his teacher come in. She had a way of arriving in a room the way evening arrives in a valley. You never quite catch the moment it happens, only that at some point it has. She crossed to the window and sat down beside him, and for a little while she said nothing at all, which was its own kind of kindness. "When I was an apprentice," she said at last, looking out at the same rain, "it took me 3 whole seasons to learn this very spell." Rowan turned to stare at her. It did. It did. She smiled, a small private smile, as though the memory still amused her a little, all these years on. 3 seasons of a pebble that wouldn't budge. I was quite convinced, near the end, that it had something personal against me. Rowan almost laughed, in spite of everything. "But you're—" He stopped. He wasn't sure how to say "you're wonderful at magic" without it sounding foolish, so he just gestured vaguely at all of her. "Now," she agreed. "Now I am. But not because it ever came easily. Rowan." She turned to look at him properly, and her voice was very gentle and very sure. "Magic isn't measured by how quickly you learn a thing. It's measured by how many times you're willing to begin again." The words settled down into Rowan somewhere below his worry, quietly, the way a leaf settles onto still water. No splash, no fuss, just a small soft landing, and then stillness. He thought about them all that night, and was still thinking about them the next morning when he walked out into the courtyard. Only this time, something was different. This time, he wasn't trying to prove he was clever. He wasn't trying to catch up to the others, or to silence that dry little chorus of lifting stones, or to show anyone anything at all. He'd set all of that down, somewhere between the windowsill and the courtyard, and left it behind him. This time, he simply gave the spell his whole attention, all of it, as though it were the only thing in the world, and the two of them had all the time there was. He slowed his breathing until it matched the slow drift of the morning mist. He steadied his hands until they stopped their small, anxious trembling. He pictured the pebble, not straining upward, not fighting him, but simply becoming light as a leaf drifting down from a high branch, as light as an ember riding the warm air up off a fire. Something that wanted to rise, and only needed permission. Levitas. For one heartbeat, nothing. And then the pebble trembled, not with the wind. Rowan knew the difference now in his bones. This came from him. And then, slowly, wobbling, uncertain of itself, it lifted. It rose no higher than the top of Rowan's boot. It hung there in the cold morning air, turning very slightly. As astonished to be up there, it seemed, as Rowan was to see it. His eyes went wide as saucers. Carefully, oh so carefully, hardly daring to breathe, he guided it higher, up past his knee, up to his chest. He turned his wrist, the gentlest turn, and the pebble drifted in a slow, wandering circle all the way around him. Once, before he lowered it back down and set it gently in the grass, exactly where it had begun. A laugh burst out of him and went ringing off across the empty courtyard. He had done it, not through luck, not because the wind had helped, not through some great hidden talent that had chosen that morning to wake up. He had done it through patience, through beginning again and again and again, more times than he'd bothered to count, right up until the once that finally worked. And here is the thing about a spell you have truly earned, rather than one that was simply handed to you. It stays. In the days that followed, the pebble rose for him every morning, steadier and surer each time, until lifting it was no harder than lifting his own hand. Then a stone, then 2 stones, then a whole armful of firewood floated tidily across the courtyard to stack itself by the kitchen door, which made the cook so pleased she gave him an extra bun with his supper for a week. The spell had stopped being a wall he threw himself against. It had become, quietly, simply his. Several days later, Rowan was trusted with an errand. He was sent down out of the hills to carry a basket of healing herbs to a village on the far side of the valley. The pale silver kind that glow beneath the moon, gathered and dried and folded into little cloth twists, good for fevers and aching chests, and the long, slow coughs that settle into people when the weather turns. He delivered them proudly, and was thanked warmly, and given a slice of bread and honey for the road, and he set off home again, in the last of the golden afternoon, feeling about as tall as the tower itself. The light was going soft and amber over the fields as he walked. And Rowan noticed, somewhere along that road, that he felt a kind of quiet he hadn't felt in a long while. Not the loud, jumpy feeling of wanting to prove something, just a steady, settled sort of confidence warm in his chest that asked nothing of anybody. It was a good feeling to walk home with, but the weather, it turned out, had other plans for the evening. It came up fast, the way weather does in the hills. First, the light thickened and went strange and coppery. Then the wind arrived, turning up the pale undersides of the leaves and pushing the long grass all one way. And then, rolling in over the far ridge, dark and heavy and full, came the clouds. The kind that don't gather so much as arrive, all at once, like they'd been running late and meant to make up the time. The rain began before Rowan reached the river, and when he did reach it, he stopped dead on the bank. The river had changed. The gentle, sparkling water he'd crossed that morning was gone. In its place ran something swollen and brown and hurrying, fed by rain that must have already fallen somewhere higher up the valley, churning along fast and loud and climbing, visibly climbing, up the muddy banks as he watched. And the old wooden bridge was gone. Not gone entirely, but broken, collapsed into the rushing water, leaving only a few of its stone supports still standing up out of the current, and a scatter of heavy wooden beams flung along the near bank where the river had shrugged them off. There was someone there, a young traveller, no older than Rowan himself, standing at the very edge of the near bank in the driving rain, soaked through, calling out across the water in a voice gone ragged at the edges. And when Rowan followed her eyes across the swollen river, his stomach dropped clean away. On the far bank, cut off, alone, small against all that dark water and darkening sky, stood a little boy, her brother. Rowan understood it in an instant without needing to be told. They'd been crossing together when the old bridge gave way, the boy already over, the girl not yet, and now the river ran high and furious between them, wider by the minute, and the light was failing, and the rain was coming down in cold grey sheets, and there was no other crossing for miles in either direction. The little boy wasn't in the water. He'd had the sense to back up onto high ground, well clear of the climbing river, and he was safe enough there for now. But he was small, and he was soaked, and he was frightened, and night was coming down over the hills like a lid closing over a box. And his sister could not reach him, and he could not reach her, and the cold and the dark were going to have him all to themselves unless somebody did something. Please. The girl turned to Rowan, hardly seeing him, seeing only that he was someone. Please, I can't get to him. The bridge went, and I can't. He's only little. He can't stay out there all night. He'll... It's all right, said Rowan. He didn't know yet whether it was, but he said it, because she needed to hear it, and because some steady part of him had already stepped forward, while the rest of him was still catching up. He looked at the broken beams scattered along the bank. He looked at the stone supports, still standing firm in the middle of all that rushing water, and he understood, the way you understand the shape of a thing all at once, what needed doing. He raised his wand. Levitas. The nearest beam, waterlogged, heavy, twice the weight it should have been with all that river soaked into it, shuddered where it lay, lifted an inch, and dropped back into the mud with a wet, defeated slap. And just like that, the old fear came flooding back into Rowan, cold as the river. His hands began to shake, not from the wind this time. From the size of it, the boy alone across the water, the sister's terrified face, the dark coming down, all of it pressing in on him at once, whispering the old whisper, "You can't, you never could, not really. And now it actually matters, and you're going to fail when it matters most." His breath went quick and shallow. He raised the wand again, desperate now, hurrying. And then, through the rain, he heard her. Not the girl, his teacher. From a quiet evening at a windowsill, a lifetime of days ago. It isn't measured by how quickly you learn. It's measured by how many times you're willing to begin again. Rowan closed his eyes. He was frightened. He didn't pretend otherwise, not even to himself. He was as frightened as he had ever been in his life. But he had learned something in that cold courtyard over all these failing mornings that he hadn't fully understood until exactly this moment. You can be frightened and steady your hands anyway. You can be frightened and begin again anyway. Those two things, it turned out, went together far better than anyone would think. He stopped trying to be quick. He stopped trying to be a hero. He let the fear be there, and he set it gently to one side, the way he'd set down all that wanting to prove himself on the morning it finally worked. And he did the only thing he truly knew how to do. He slowed his breathing, out there in the roaring rain. He steadied his hands. He pictured the heavy, sodden beam not as a great weight fighting him, but as something light as a leaf, as light as an ember riding the warm air upward. Some things that only needed permission to rise. Levitas. The beam lifted out of the mud, slow, steady, sure. It rose, streaming river water, up into the storming air. And it did not drop. Rowan turned his wrist, gentle and certain, and guided it out over the water and laid it down across the two nearest stone supports, as neatly as if he were setting a book back on its shelf. 1. He did not stop to marvel. There wasn't time, and anyway, he understood by now that the marveling could wait until after. He found the next beam, and he began again. Levitas. 2. The rain came down harder, if anything. The wind pulled at him, flinging the wet hair into his eyes, trying its best to spoil his aim. His arm burned, and beam by beam, one careful lifting at a time, out there in the thick of a storm that showed no sign at all of easing. Rowan built a bridge across the swollen river, not the whole old bridge, not grand, not beautiful, but a path. A sturdy, sensible path of floated timber, laid plank by plank from the near bank to the far, from the girl to her brother, straight across all that dark and hurrying water. When the last beam settled into place, he lowered his wand, and his knees very nearly gave out under him. The girl was already running. She went across that patched-together bridge without a moment's hesitation, calling her brother's name over the roar of the water, and the little boy came stumbling down off his high ground to meet her. And they met in the middle of Rowan's bridge, over the middle of the river, and she caught him up and held on to him the way you hold on to something you had truly, genuinely been afraid you might lose. The rain did not let up for it. It kept on falling, cold and steady and indifferent, the way rain does, with no interest whatsoever in the small, enormous thing that had just happened underneath it. But the two of them were together and safe, and that was going to have to be enough to go on with. And it was. The girl carried her brother back across to the near bank and set him down, and wrapped her own soaked coat around him anyway, which helped very little and meant a very great deal. Then she turned to Rowan, and she opened her mouth to thank him, and found she hadn't anything like the right words for it. How could she? There weren't words the right size. She stood there in the pouring rain with her brother's hand in hers, and she looked at Rowan. And what came out in the end was only a small, broken, "Thank you, I don't, thank you," and a helpless little shake of her head, because thank you was so plainly not enough, and she knew it, and she couldn't do any better. And she was trying so hard to make him understand with her whole face what her words couldn't manage. And Rowan understood her perfectly, better, maybe, than any polished speech would have made him. He gave her a small nod, the kind that says, "I know. It's all right. I know." And that was that. It was said, all of it, without either of them managing a proper sentence. And then there was no more time for standing about in it. The night was down for good now, and the rain wasn't stopping, and there were warm fires to get to. Rowan pointed them towards the village he'd come from, where he'd left the healing herbs, where there'd be a hearth and dry blankets, and somebody glad to take in 2 cold children out of the dark. And the 3 of them hurried off the bank together, heads down against the weather, the girl with her arm tight around her brother, all of them making for the lights of the valley as fast as the wet road would allow. Rowan saw them safely onto the village lane, and then he turned for home and walked the long way back up into the hills through the falling rain, tired to his bones and smiling anyway, the storm still coming down all around him the whole way. Because only a few days before, a small handful of days, really no time at all, he had stood at a rainy window and very nearly given up forever on the exact same spell that had just, this very evening, carried a frightened little boy back across a river to his sister. Perhaps, Rowan thought, walking home in the rain, that was the true purpose of learning magic, not to float feathers about a classroom, not to amaze anyone, or to be quickest, or cleverest, or to have things come easily, but to be able, once in a while, on the right dark evening, to make the world a little kinder than you found it. That night, back at last, the Everlight Tower shimmered quietly in the wet dark, ivy dripping against the old stone, the drifting lanterns come home to roost. And as Rowan climbed at last into his bed, warm and dry and worn right through, the rain still whispering against the window, he thought back over all of it, every failed morning, every wobbling pebble, every single time he had wanted to set the wand down and never pick it up again. And a strange thing had happened to those memories. Looking back at them now, from here, they didn't feel like wasted days anymore. Not one of them. They felt like small, quiet steps, a long staircase of them, each one no higher than the top of a boot, leading him, without his ever quite noticing, to exactly the riverbank where he was always going to be needed. And with that gentle, settling thought, Rowan drifted down into sleep, dreaming, easily and without hurry, of all the small and wonderful ways that tomorrow's magic might help somebody else. There. I do like where that one ends up. I think what stays with me about it isn't the bridge in the end, though the bridge is very fine. It's the pebble. All those cold mornings with the pebble when nothing was working and nobody was watching, and it would have been the easiest thing in the world to stop. That's where the whole story really happens, if you ask me. The river's just where it finally shows. So if there's something you've been beginning again, and again, and again, out there in your own days, something that hasn't lifted for you yet, no matter how many mornings you've given it, you might let this be your small reminder that the not yet is not the same as the never. It's only the part before. And you don't have to carry any of it into tonight. You don't have to lift anything now, dear insomniac. Nothing at all. Just let your hands go quiet and let your breathing go slow and let the whole long day settle down out of your shoulders like rain easing off a roof. Whenever you're ready, begin again tomorrow. For now, only rest. Sleep well. I'll leave the lamp lit, the way I always do. Good night.